The morning sun broke over the English coast on the 15th of September 1940, casting long shadows across the dispersal huts at RAF Northolt. Inside one of these simple wooden structures, a lone figure sat apart from his fellow pilots, methodically cleaning his service revolver, while the others played cards and smoked cigarettes. Josef František, a Czech pilot flying with the Royal Air Force's 303 Polish Squadron, had already been airborne twice that day, and intelligence reports suggested the Luftwaffe would be returning in force before sunset. The tension in the air was palpable, a mixture of fatigue, fear, and the peculiar exhilaration that came from knowing you might have to fight for your life at any moment. František was an enigma to most who knew him. While the other pilots of 303 Squadron formed tight bonds, sharing jokes and stories between missions, the Czech pilot remained solitary, preferring his own company to the camaraderie of the mess. This was not mere antisocial behavior, but rather the manifestation of a man who had already lost everything that mattered to him. His homeland had been betrayed and dismembered by foreign powers. His air force had been disbanded. He had fled through Poland, then through Romania, through the Mediterranean to France, and finally to Britain, always one step ahead of the German advance. Every country he had fought for had fallen. The only thing that remained constant in his life was his Hawker Hurricane and his burning desire to kill as many German airmen as possible. The Hawker Hurricane Mark I that František flew was a robust, dependable fighter aircraft, though not as glamorous as its more famous cousin, the Supermarine Spitfire. Powered by a Rolls-Royce Merlin III engine producing 1,030 horsepower, the Hurricane could reach a maximum speed of 318 miles per hour at 17,500 feet. It was armed with 8 Browning, 303 machine guns, 4 in each wing, each capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute. The Hurricane's construction was somewhat antiquated compared to the all-metal Spitfire, featuring a fabric-covered steel tube framework for the rear fuselage, but this traditional construction actually made it easier to repair in the field. Battle damage that would ground a Spitfire for days could often be patched on a Hurricane overnight. František's Hurricane bore the squadron codes RFR, painted in the standard camouflage scheme of dark green and dark earth on the upper surfaces, with sky blue underneath. But there was nothing standard about the way he flew it. While RAF doctrine emphasized formation flying and coordinated attacks, František had developed his own tactics, born from his experiences in the earlier stages of the war and refined through countless engagements over England. He preferred to hunt alone, stalking German bomber formations and diving upon them from unexpected angles, firing short, deadly bursts before breaking away and climbing back into the Sunday. The journey that brought Josef František to that dispersal hut at Northolt was as remarkable as it was tragic. Born on the 7th of October 1914, in the small Moravian town of Otaslavis, František grew up in the newly formed Czechoslovak Republic, a nation carved from the ruins of the Austro-Hungarian Empire after the First World War. He joined the Czechoslovak Air Force in 1934, training as a fighter pilot at a time when Europe was rearming and dark clouds were gathering on the horizon. By 1938, he was a qualified military pilot, skilled in aerobatics and gunnery, serving with the 5th Air Regiment at Olomouc. Then came Munich. In September 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and French Premier Édouard Daladier, desperate to avoid war, agreed to German dictator Adolf Hitler's demands for the Sudetenland, the German-speaking border regions of Czechoslovakia. The Czechoslovak government was not even invited to the conference that decided its fate. František and his fellow airmen listened in disbelief as their supposed allies handed over a third of their country to Nazi Germany. The Czechoslovak Air Force, well-trained and equipped with modern fighters like the Avia B-534 biplane and the newer Bf-109-inspired Avia B-35, could have given a good account of itself in combat, but the political betrayal made resistance impossible. For František, this betrayal cut deep. When the Germans occupied the remainder of Czechoslovakia in March 1939, transforming it into the so-called Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia, he refused to accept German authority. Along with many other Czech pilots, he fled to Poland, where he joined the Polish Air Force as a foreign volunteer. The Polish High Command, recognizing that war with Germany was now inevitable, welcomed these experienced Czech airmen. František was assigned to a unit flying the PZL P-11C, a high-wing monoplane fighter that was already becoming obsolete by 1939 standards. The PZL P-11C, though advanced for its time when it entered service in 1934, was outclassed by the latest German fighters. With a maximum speed of only 242 miles per hour, it was far slower than the Messerschmitt Bf 109E, which could reach 354 miles per hour. Armed with four 7.92 mm machine guns, it lacked the hitting power of German fighters equipped with cannon. Nevertheless, Polish pilots, František among them, fought with extraordinary courage when Germany invaded on the 1st of September 1939. František saw combat within days of the invasion, scrambling to intercept formations of German bombers escorted by the dreaded Bf 109 seconds. The speed disparity was immediately apparent. The Polish fighters had to use every trick they knew to survive against the German machines. František learned to use the P-11C's excellent maneuverability to his advantage, turning inside the faster German fighters and firing deflection shots when the opportunity presented itself. He claimed his first confirmed victory during these desperate September days, shooting down a German bomber, but the outcome of the campaign was never in doubt. Poland's air force was overwhelmed by superior numbers and more modern equipment. As Warsaw burned and Polish resistance collapsed, František once again became a refugee. He made his way south through the chaos of the collapsing Polish state, joining thousands of Polish military personnel fleeing to Romania. The Romanian government, officially neutral but already falling under German influence, interned the Polish and Czech servicemen in camps. For František, internment was unacceptable. After several weeks, he escaped and made his way across the Balkans to Syria, then controlled by France, and from there to France itself, arriving in late 1939. France offered František a chance to continue the fight. The French Air Force was forming units of foreign volunteers, including the Groupe de Chasse 1, divided by 145, which consisted primarily of Polish pilots, though it included some Czechs like František. He transitioned to flying French fighters, first the Morane Saulnier MS 406, and later the American-built Curtiss Hawk 75 amperes. The Hawk was a significant improvement over the PZL P-11C, with a top speed of 311 miles per hour and 4 or 6 machine guns, depending on the variant. František quickly distinguished himself in combat during the Battle of France, demonstrating an aggressive flying style and exceptional marksmanship. When Germany launched Fall Gelb, the invasion of France and the Low Countries, on the 10th of May 1940, František was ready. Over the next 6 weeks, as the German panzers raced toward the Channel and the French army disintegrated, he flew multiple sorties daily, engaging German fighters and bombers. He added more kills to his tally, but once again he was fighting for a losing cause. The Luftwaffe had numerical superiority, better coordination with ground forces, and in many cases, superior equipment. The Messerschmitt Bf 109E3, which formed the backbone of the German fighter force, outperformed most Allied fighters in speed and climb rate, and its combination of machine guns and a 20 mm cannon gave it superior firepower. By June, France was collapsing. František and other foreign pilots received orders to evacuate to Britain. They made their way to ports in southern France and North Africa, boarding ships bound for England. For the third time in less than 2 years, František had been forced to abandon a country he was fighting for. The accumulated trauma of these defeats, the deaths of comrades, and the constant retreating had hardened him into something beyond an ordinary fighter pilot. He had become a man with nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. Britain, in the summer of 1940, stood alone against Nazi Germany. After the fall of France, The island nation represented the last remaining free state in Western Europe, capable of resisting Hitler's ambitions. The RAF, though bloodied from the fighting in France, remained a potent force, equipped with the world's first integrated air defense system, combining radar stations, observer posts, and fighter control rooms. The Luftwaffe, flushed with victory after victory, prepared to destroy RAF Fighter Command as a prelude to Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain. František, arriving in Britain with his combat experience and growing list of aerial victories, was assigned to 303 Polish Squadron, one of several Polish units being formed within the RAF structure. The squadron was based at RAF Northolt in Middlesex, flying Hawker Hurricanes. The Polish pilots, like František, had already fought the Germans in Poland and France. They were experienced, motivated, and utterly determined to exact revenge for the destruction of their homeland. The RAF command initially had doubts about these foreign pilots, particularly regarding language barriers and their ability to integrate into British tactical doctrine, but these doubts would soon be dispelled in the most dramatic fashion possible. Squadron leader Ronald Kellett commanded 303 Squadron, with Flight Lieutenant John Kent as one of the flight commanders. Both were RAF officers assigned to lead the Polish unit, though the squadron's senior Polish officer, squadron leader Witold Urbanowicz, exercised considerable informal authority. František, despite his combat record, held the rank of sergeant pilot. He spoke limited English, communicated poorly with his superiors, and showed little interest in following standard RAF procedures. His request to fly as a lone hunter rather than in formation was initially denied, but František had a way of making his own rules. The Hurricane František flew was a formidable weapon when handled by an expert. Its 8 Browning machine guns, while lacking the explosive punch of cannon, delivered a combined weight of fire that could shred enemy aircraft. Each gun was loaded with a mix of ammunition types, including standard ball, armor-piercing, and incendiary rounds. When all 8 guns fired simultaneously, they could put 160 rounds into the air every second. At the standard harmonization range of 250 yards, these 8 streams of bullets converged into a lethal cone of fire, roughly 6 feet in diameter. A 2-second burst could pump 320 rounds into a target, more than enough to down any aircraft if the bullets struck vital areas. František understood the Hurricane's strengths and weaknesses intimately. The aircraft's relatively slow speed compared to the Bf 109 meant that in level flight, a German fighter could escape simply by opening the throttle. However, the Hurricane could turn inside a Bf 109, and its rugged construction allowed it to absorb punishment and keep flying. František developed a tactic of positioning himself above and behind bomber formations, using the sun to mask his approach, then diving at high speed to attack stragglers or aircraft on the edge of the formation. He would close to near point-blank range, sometimes as close as 50 yards, fire a short burst, and break away before the escorting fighters could react. This aggressive, almost reckless approach violated RAF doctrine, which emphasized formation integrity and mutual support. British pilots were trained to attack in sections of 2 or 3 aircraft, covering each other and coordinating their attacks. František rejected this approach based on his combat experience. He had seen too many formations become scattered in the chaos of combat, leaving individual pilots vulnerable. He trusted his own skills and situational awareness more than he trusted others to protect him. His squadron mates found him difficult and uncooperative, but they could not argue with his results. The Battle of Britain officially began on the 10th of July 1940, though the most intense phase of fighting occurred between August and September. The Luftwaffe's strategy evolved through several phases, beginning with attacks on shipping and coastal targets, then shifting to attacks on RAF airfields and infrastructure, and finally, in September, turning to the bombing of London and other cities. For František and 303 Squadron, the period from late August through September 1940 represented the crucible in which they would forge their reputation as one of the most effective fighter units in the RAF. The 30th of August 1940 marked 303 Squadron's first major engagement. The squadron scrambled to intercept a large formation of German bombers and fighters approaching London. František, flying with the squadron despite his preference for solo operations, engaged a formation of Dornier Do-17 bombers. The Dornier Do-17, nicknamed the Flying Pencil for its slender fuselage, was a twin-engine medium bomber with a crew of 4, armed with multiple machine guns for defense and capable of carrying up to 2,205 pounds of bombs. On paper, a tight formation of Do-17 seconds, with their overlapping fields of defensive fire, should have been able to fend off single-engine fighters. František approached from the rear quarter, slightly high, where the Dornier's defensive armament was less concentrated. He opened fire at 200 yards, his 8 machine guns hammering out a stream of bullets. Smoke began streaming from one of the Dornier's engines. He closed to 100 yards, firing another burst. Pieces of the bomber's fuselage tore away. The Dornier dropped out of formation, one engine burning, and began a long spiral toward the earth below. František did not wait to watch it crash. He pulled up and around, scanning for his next target, his ammunition counters showing he still had plenty of rounds remaining. Within minutes, he had positioned himself behind another Dornier. This time he closed to less than 50 yards before opening fire, so close he could see the German gunner's frantic movements as the man tried to bring his weapon to bear. František's bullets raked the bomber from nose to tail. The Dornier's canopy shattered, and smoke poured from the cockpit. The bomber nosed over into a steep dive. František claimed 2 confirmed kills that day, his first victories in the Battle of Britain. Over the following days and weeks, František's score mounted with astonishing speed. He flew multiple sorties daily, often scrambling 3 or 4 times as the Luftwaffe sent wave after wave of bombers toward British targets. His Hurricane, RFR, became a familiar sight at Northolt, often returning with empty ammunition boxes and the smell of cordite hanging in the cockpit. Ground crews marveled at how quickly he went through ammunition, a testament to how often he was finding targets and engaging them. The 2nd of September 1940, František claimed a Messerschmitt Bf 109. This was a different proposition from shooting down bombers. The Bf 109E, powered by a Daimler-Benz DB 601 engine producing 1,175 horsepower, was faster than the Hurricane, had a better rate of climb, and was armed with 2 7.92mm machine guns and 2 20mm MG-FF cannon. German pilots had been trained in the latest fighter tactics, using the swarm formation of 4 aircraft divided into 2 pairs, which allowed for mutual support while maintaining flexibility. Defeating a Bf 109 required superior tactics, excellent marksmanship, and usually a healthy dose of luck. František spotted the 109 escort fighters above a bomber formation he was stalking. Rather than avoid them, he climbed toward them, using the Hurricane's better turning ability to his advantage. When one Bf 109 made the mistake of trying to turn with him, František got inside the German's turn circle and lined up a deflection shot. Leading the target by the correct amount, he fired a 3-second burst. His bullets caught the Messerschmitt in the engine and cockpit area. The German fighter rolled over and went down, trailing black smoke. František dove away before the other 109 seconds could gang up on him, descending through a cloud layer and emerging behind another bomber formation. His fellow pilots in 303 Squadron, all experienced combat veterans themselves, recognized František's exceptional skills, but found him increasingly difficult to work with. He ignored formation discipline, broke away to pursue targets on his own initiative, and rarely followed the flight leader's instructions. After several incidents where František had left his wingman behind to pursue German aircraft, the squadron leadership made an unusual decision. They would allow František to operate as a lone hunter, taking off with the squadron but then breaking away to find and engage targets independently. This arrangement suited František perfectly. Now officially sanctioned to fly alone, he developed his methods even further. He would climb to 20,000 feet or higher, position himself with the sun at his back, and wait for German formations to appear. The RAF's radar stations and observer corps posts provided early warning of incoming raids, and fighter controllers vectored squadrons toward the enemy. But František often ignored these instructions, preferring to use his own eyes and instincts to find prey. The 15th of September, 1940, would become known as Battle of Britain Day, the climax of the German air assault on Britain. The Luftwaffe launched 2 massive raids that day, sending hundreds of bombers and fighters against London in an attempt to overwhelm the RAF's defences. Every available fighter squadron scrambled to meet the threat, and František flew 3 separate missions that day, claiming multiple victories in combat that would help turn the tide of the battle. The morning raid developed shortly after 11 a.m. František took off with 303 Squadron as part of a wing formation that would eventually involve over 150 British fighters. As the formation climbed toward the incoming German aircraft, František spotted the telltale black dots of enemy bombers at 15,000 feet, stepped up in formations with fighter escort higher up. Without radioing his intentions, he broke away from the squadron and began climbing to gain an altitude advantage. The German formation consisted of Dornier Du 17 seconds and Heinkel He 111 seconds, escorted by Bf 109 seconds and twin-engine Bf 110 fighters. The Heinkel He 111 was a larger bomber than the Dornier, with a crew of 5 and a bomb load of up to 4,400 pounds. Its defensive armament included up to 7 machine guns, and like the Dornier, it relied on tight formation, flying to mass defensive firepower against attacking fighters. The Bf 110, meanwhile, was a heavy fighter concept that had proven vulnerable to single-engine fighters like the Hurricane and Spitfire. Despite its powerful armament of 2 20mm cannon and 4 machine guns in the nose, plus a flexible rear-facing machine gun, František positioned himself 3,000 feet above the bombers and began his attack dive. He selected a Heinkel on the edge of the formation, reasoning that it would have less mutual support from the other bombers' guns. Diving at over 300 miles per hour, he closed rapidly, holding his fire until he was at 150 yards. The Hurricane shuddered as all 8 machine guns opened up, and he could see his tracers arcing into the Heinkel's starboard engine. Flames erupted immediately. Without pausing, he skidded his Hurricane to the left and fired at another Heinkel. This burst was less accurate, but he saw pieces fly off the bomber's wing before he had to break away hard right to avoid a head-on pass by a Bf 109 that had spotted him. The Bf 109 flashed past, its cannon shells missing František's Hurricane by feet. He hauled the Hurricane into a violent turn, pulling so hard that grey mist formed in the cockpit as the G-forces pushed him to the edge of consciousness. The Hurricane groaned under the strain but held together. František reversed his turn, looked back, and saw the Bf 109 trying to follow him around. The German pilot was good, but the Hurricane's tighter turning circle gave František the advantage. He rolled out, pointing roughly at where the 109 would be, fired a long burst, and saw the German fighter break off, trailing white coolant smoke. He claimed this as a probable, knowing the damaged cooling system would likely force the German to land or bail out before reaching France. František dove back toward the bomber stream. The first Heinkel he had attacked was going down, one engine blazing, leaving a trail of smoke across the sky. He looked for another target and spotted a Bf 110 on the periphery of the fight. The big twin-engine fighter was attempting to protect the bombers, but its lack of maneuverability made it vulnerable. František approached from below and behind, where the Bf 110's rear gunner had a limited field of fire. At 100 yards, he opened fire, walking his bullets up the Bf 110's fuselage. The rear canopy shattered, the rear gunner's gun went silent, and then black smoke began pouring from both engines. The Bf 110 rolled over and spiraled down. Running low on ammunition after this furious engagement, František broke off and returned to Northolt. He landed, reported 3 confirmed kills and 1 probable, and stood by while his Hurricane was rearmed and refueled. The ground crew worked with practiced efficiency, loading fresh ammunition belts into the 8-wing guns and topping off the fuel tanks. Within 20 minutes, RFR was ready for another sortie. The afternoon raid came in around 2 p.m., an even larger force than the morning attack. František scrambled again, this time climbing independently from the start. He reached 18,000 feet and spotted the massive German formation approaching from the southeast. There were dozens of bombers, Heinkels and Dorniers mixed together, with layers of escort fighters above and around them. It was an intimidating sight, a multi-layered aerial armada that filled a huge volume of sky. František studied the formation, looking for weakness. He noticed that one group of Dorniers had become slightly separated from the main formation, probably due to differences in speed or navigation. These isolated bombers would receive less support from the escort fighters. He positioned himself in the sun and dove toward them. The Dornier pilots, focused on their bombing run, did not see František until he opened fire on the rearmost aircraft in their formation. His first burst killed the Dornier's pilot, and the bomber nosed over into an uncontrolled dive. He skidded right and fired at the next Dornier in line. This burst was less effective, striking the bomber but not causing obvious critical damage. Before he could fire again, he saw tracers flash past his canopy. A Bf 109 had spotted him and was attacking from his 4 o'clock position. František broke hard left, the Hurricane responding instantly to his control inputs. The Bf 109's cannon shells passed harmlessly to the right. He continued his turn, trying to reverse onto the German's tail, but the 109 pilot was experienced and did not fall for this trap. Instead, the German used his superior speed to extend away. Climbing back toward the Sunday, František let him go, knowing he could not catch the faster aircraft in a stern chase. He looked around and realized the bombers had scattered during the engagement. Individual Dorniers and Heinkels were all around him, their formations broken up by the attacks of multiple RAF squadrons. This was a target-rich environment. František selected a Heinkel that appeared to be damaged already, with one engine feathered and producing no power. He closed on it from behind, the Heinkel's rear gunner firing at him desperately but inaccurately. František waited until he was at 75 yards, then fired a 4-second burst that silenced the rear gunner and set the Heinkel's remaining good engine on fire. The bomber went into a slow descending turn, doomed. František's ammunition was running low again. His last engagement used most of his remaining rounds. He spotted another damaged bomber, a Dornier limping along well below the main formations, and decided to use his final bullets on it. Approaching from the side, he fired his last burst. The Dornier's port engine exploded, and the bomber rolled over and entered a spin. František watched long enough to see that the crew was not going to recover, then turned for home, his guns empty. That evening, as the ground crew rearmed RFR once more, František sat alone, methodically cleaning his pistol again, a ritual he performed after every mission. Other pilots from 303 Squadron celebrated their victories, but František remained apart. When the squadron intelligence officer came to debrief him, František reported 5 confirmed kills for the day in his broken English, bringing his total to 11 in just over 2 weeks of combat. The intelligence officer, accustomed to pilots who exaggerated their claims, was skeptical until other pilots and ground observers confirmed František's encounters. The Czech pilot was becoming an ace of aces. The Luftwaffe continued its assault through late September, though with decreasing intensity as German losses mounted. Adolf Hitler, frustrated by the RAF's continued resistance, had already begun postponing Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The battle was turning in Britain's favour, though this was not yet apparent to the pilots fighting it. To František, each day simply meant more opportunities to kill Germans, more chances to avenge the betrayals and defeats that had defined his war thus far. By the end of September, František had become the highest-scoring pilot in 303 Squadron and one of the leading aces in all of Fighter Command. His aggressive tactics, while unorthodox, had proven devastatingly effective. He had mastered the art of the surprise attack, understanding that most aerial victories went to the pilot who saw the enemy first and attacked from an advantageous position. His marksmanship was exceptional, a product of both natural ability and constant practice. Other pilots might fire long bursts from 300 or 400 yards, hoping some bullets would hit. František closed to near point-blank range and fired short, precise bursts that rarely missed. The hurricane he flew, RFR, bore the scars of combat. Patched bullet holes dotted the fuselage and wings, testament to the times František's aggressive tactics had brought him under enemy fire. The ground crew responsible for maintaining the aircraft developed enormous respect for both the plane and its pilot. The hurricane always brought František home, no matter how damaged, and František always found Germans to shoot down. Not all of František's missions ended in victory. On several occasions he was bounced by Bf 109 seconds and had to fight desperately to escape. Once, his hurricane took several cannon shell hits that shredded the fabric covering on his tail and punched holes through his elevator. He managed to nurse the damaged aircraft back to Northolt, landing at high speed because the elevator damage made slow flight unstable. Another time, a German bomber's defensive fire hit his engine, causing it to lose power. He glided back across the English countryside, barely making it to an emergency landing field before the engine seized completely. These close calls did nothing to diminish František's aggressive approach. If anything, they seemed to make him more determined, more willing to take risks that other pilots considered suicidal. His squadron mates began to wonder if František had a death wish, if he was deliberately courting fate in every engagement. Those who knew his history understood that František was not trying to die. He was trying to kill as many Germans as possible before death inevitably found him. October brought changing weather, with increasing cloud cover and deteriorating visibility that affected both sides' operations. The Luftwaffe began shifting its tactics, conducting more fighter-bomber raids using Bf 109 seconds carrying single bombs and launching attacks under cloud cover that made interception more difficult. František adapted to these new conditions, learning to patrol beneath the cloud base and pounce on German raiders as they emerged from the murk. On the 8th of October 1940, František was scrambled to intercept a raid developing over the Thames estuary. The weather was poor, with broken cloud at 3,000 feet and a solid overcast at 10,000 feet. Visibility beneath the clouds was limited by haze and industrial smoke. František flew alone, as had become his custom, searching for targets in the grey afternoon light. He spotted a formation of Bf 110 seconds escorting what appeared to be Bf 109 fighter bombers through a gap in the clouds. The twin-engine Bf 110 seconds were still being used despite their vulnerability, primarily because they had the range to escort raids deep into Britain, something the Bf 109's limited fuel capacity made difficult. František positioned himself in the cloud base and dove on the trailing Bf 110. His first burst set one of the Bf 110's engines on fire. The German fighter rolled away trailing smoke, its pilot heading for home. František followed it down, firing another burst that killed the rear gunner and tore chunks out of the Bf 110's tail. The German fighter entered the cloud layer, and František pulled up rather than follow it into the clouds where he might become disoriented. Emerging back into the open, he found himself alone. The German formation had scattered into the clouds, and he could not locate them. Low on fuel, he turned toward Northolt. The mission felt incomplete, one confirmed kill, but a sense that he should have found more targets. This frustration was typical of František's mindset. No matter how many Germans he shot down, it was never enough. As October progressed, the intensity of the Battle of Britain decreased. The Luftwaffe shifted its focus to night bombing, a tactic that Fighter Command had limited ability to counter with its day fighters. František's opportunities for combat diminished, though he continued to fly patrols and scramble to intercept the occasional daylight raid. His final score for the Battle of Britain was climbing toward a number that would make him one of the top-scoring pilots of the entire campaign. The exact tally of František's victories has been the subject of historical debate. Combat claims were often duplicated, with multiple pilots claiming the same aircraft, and confirmation was not always possible in the chaos of large engagements. However, most historians credit František with at least 17 confirmed victories during the Battle of Britain, achieved in just over 6 weeks of combat. This total made him the highest-scoring Allied pilot of the battle, surpassing even the most successful British aces. What made František's achievement even more remarkable was that he accomplished it while flying essentially alone, without the mutual support that formation flying provided. Every victory came from his individual skill, aggression, and tactical acumen. He had no wingman to warn him of threats or cover his attacks. He relied solely on his own situational awareness and the periodic warnings from ground controllers who could see the overall tactical picture on their radar screens and plotting tables. František's success also highlighted the effectiveness of experienced, motivated pilots. While the RAF was recruiting and training hundreds of new pilots to replace losses, men like František, who had been fighting since 1939, brought a level of skill and aggression that training could not replicate. His combat experience in Poland and France had taught him lessons that British pilots were learning for the first time over England. He understood how to manage his ammunition, how to position for attacks, when to break off an engagement, and how to use his aircraft's strengths while avoiding its weaknesses. The psychological aspect of František's success cannot be ignored. He was fighting not just for Britain, but for a homeland that had been destroyed, for comrades who had died in Poland and France, for a way of life that the Nazis had obliterated. This gave him a motivation that transcended mere duty or patriotism. Every German aircraft he shot down was a small payment on an unpayable debt, a tiny act of vengeance for an enormous wrong. His squadron mates in 303, Squadron, themselves motivated by similar losses and desires for revenge, recognized a kindred spirit in František, even if they found him difficult to befriend. The Poles had lost their country just as František had lost his. They understood his isolation, his anger, his relentless aggression in combat. The unit's esprit de corps was built on shared trauma and shared determination to make the Germans pay. By late October, 303 Squadron had established itself as one of Fighter Command's most effective units, with František as its top ace. The squadron had claimed over 100 German aircraft destroyed, a tally that exceeded most other RAF squadrons, despite having been operational for less than 2 months. The success of 303 Squadron and other Polish units led to a reassessment of Fighter Command's initial skepticism about foreign pilots. The Poles, Czechs, and other Allied pilots were not liabilities, but rather some of the RAF's most valuable assets. As October turned to November, the weather continued to deteriorate, and Luftwaffe daylight operations became increasingly rare. František continued to fly patrols, but days would pass without contact with the enemy. For a man whose entire existence had become focused on killing Germans, these quiet days were almost unbearable. He grew increasingly restless and withdrawn, his already limited interaction with his squadron mates declining further. On the morning of the 8th of October 1940, František took off on what would be his final flight. The exact circumstances of his death remain somewhat unclear, shrouded in the fog of war and limited official documentation. What is known is that he was flying a routine patrol, alone as always, in his Hurricane RFR. Weather conditions were poor, with low clouds and limited visibility. František's Hurricane crashed near Ewell in Surrey. The aircraft struck the ground at high speed, killing him instantly. There were no witnesses to the crash, no reports of enemy aircraft in the area, no radio transmissions indicating trouble. The official investigation concluded that František had likely become disoriented in the poor weather and lost control of his aircraft, or suffered some kind of mechanical failure that prevented him from recovering. Some historians have suggested that František, exhausted from weeks of constant combat and multiple daily sorties, may have fallen asleep or lost consciousness due to fatigue. Others have speculated that he may have been wounded in an earlier engagement, and the injury contributed to his crash. A few have even suggested that František, depressed by the loss of everything he had fought for and facing the prospect of a long war with uncertain outcome, may have deliberately flown into the ground, though there is no evidence to support this theory, and it seems inconsistent with his aggressive desire to kill as many Germans as possible. The most likely explanation is simple pilot error in bad weather. Flying on instruments was a challenging skill, And while František was an exceptional combat pilot, instrument flying required different abilities and constant practice. Disorientation in clouds could happen to any pilot, even highly experienced ones, and the result was often fatal. František may have entered a cloud bank, lost his visual references, and entered a spiral or unusual attitude without realizing it until too late to recover. Whatever the cause, Josef František was dead at age 26, having survived combat over 3 countries, only to die in an accident over the nation he had helped defend. His body was recovered from the wreckage and buried with military honours at Northolt. His fellow pilots from 303 Squadron attended the funeral, paying their respects to a man they had found difficult to know but impossible not to admire. František's death was mourned not just by his squadron, but by Fighter Command as a whole. Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, the commander of Fighter Command, personally acknowledged František's exceptional contribution to the battle. The Czech pilot had become a symbol of the foreign pilots who had flown and fought for Britain, men who had lost their own countries but continued fighting against the Nazi regime that had destroyed them. In the final accounting of the Battle of Britain, František's 17 confirmed victories made him the top-scoring ace of the campaign among Allied pilots. Some German pilots had higher scores, but they were fighting over home territory, with opportunities to be rescued and return to combat if shot down, advantages František did not enjoy. His achievement was all the more remarkable given that he accomplished it in roughly 6 weeks of combat, flying essentially alone against some of the Luftwaffe's best pilots. František was posthumously awarded the Distinguished Flying Medal, Britain's decoration for valour in aerial combat for non-commissioned officers. The Czechoslovak government in exile later awarded him additional decorations, including the Czechoslovak War Cross. In the years after the war, as the full scope of his achievements became clear, František was recognized as one of the great fighter pilots of the Second World War, a man whose skill, courage, and determination had helped turn the tide at a critical moment in history. The Hurricane he flew, RFR, survived him by only a few weeks before being lost in combat with another pilot. No part of František's aircraft survives today, though replicas and restored Hurricanes bearing similar markings appear at air shows, keeping the memory of the Battle of Britain alive. The dispersal hut at Northolt, where František sat cleaning his pistol, is long gone, replaced by modern buildings. The airfield itself is now part of RAF Northolt, still an active military installation though much changed from its wartime configuration. František's legacy extends beyond his victory tally. He represented something essential about the Battle of Britain that is sometimes overlooked in accounts that focus on British pilots and British resistance. The battle was truly an international effort, with pilots from Poland, Czechoslovakia, France, Belgium, and other occupied nations fighting alongside the British. These men had already lost their homelands and were fighting not just to defend Britain, but to keep alive the hope that someday their own countries might be liberated. The tactical lessons from František's success were studied by Fighter Command and influenced subsequent fighter tactics. His preference for solo hunting, while not adopted wholesale, led to more flexible tactics that allowed skilled pilots more initiative rather than rigidly adhering to formation discipline. The value of surprise attacks from advantageous positions, which František exemplified, became a fundamental principle of fighter combat that remains valid today. František's story also highlights the human cost of the political failures that preceded the war. The betrayal at Munich, the abandonment of Czechoslovakia, and the subsequent rapid collapse of Poland and France created thousands of military refugees who had to rebuild their lives and continue fighting in foreign lands. František's isolation and difficulty forming bonds with his squadron mates can be understood as symptoms of the trauma caused by these repeated losses and betrayals. He was a man who had lost too much to risk caring deeply about anything except killing the enemy. In Czechoslovakia, František's memory was suppressed during the communist era after 1948, as the Soviet-aligned regime was reluctant to celebrate heroes who had fought for the West. Only after the Velvet Revolution of 1989 did František receive proper recognition in his homeland. Today he is remembered as a national hero, his portrait appearing in museums and his name given to streets and military facilities. September 17, the date of one of his most successful days of combat, is sometimes commemorated as František Day by Czech military aviation enthusiasts. The strategic significance of the Battle of Britain cannot be overstated. Had the Luftwaffe succeeded in destroying Fighter Command, Operation Sea Lion might have proceeded, and Britain could have been invaded or forced to negotiate a peace settlement. This would have left Nazi Germany in control of continental Europe, with no remaining European opponents. The Soviet Union might never have been attacked, or if attacked, might have faced Germany without the distraction of a British threat in the West. The United States would have found it far more difficult to enter the war in Europe without Britain as a base of operations. František's 17 victories, multiplied by the hundreds of other fighter command pilots who shot down German aircraft, added up to a defeat that forced Hitler to postpone and eventually cancel his invasion plans. Each Luftwaffe bomber and fighter destroyed represented not just a piece of equipment, but a trained crew lost, aircraft production diverted from other fronts, and damage to German morale. The Luftwaffe never recovered the initiative after its failure over Britain, and while it remained a formidable force for years afterward, it never again came close to achieving air superiority over any major theatre of operations. František's Hurricane, the Hawker aircraft that seemed so ordinary compared to the glamorous Spitfire, proved itself to be one of the great fighters of the war. More numerous than the Spitfire during the Battle of Britain, Hurricanes were credited with shooting down more German aircraft than all other defences combined, including anti-aircraft guns and Spitfires. The Hurricane's stability as a gun platform made it ideal for bomber interception, while its ruggedness and ease of repair kept damaged aircraft returning to service quickly. František's aggressive tactics maximized these strengths, getting close enough that marksmanship was nearly guaranteed, and trusting the Hurricane's structure to absorb return fire. The final flights of František's short life were spent over the green fields and industrial landscapes of southeastern England, skies he had not known existed 2 years earlier when he was flying Czechoslovak Air Force aircraft over Moravia. The path that brought him from Czechoslovakia to the cockpit of a British Hurricane was marked by betrayal, defeat, and loss, yet he never stopped fighting. His determination to continue combat despite 3 lost campaigns demonstrated a resilience that transcended national identity or political allegiance. He was fighting for an idea, the belief that fascist aggression had to be opposed regardless of the cost. When František's Hurricane hit the ground that October morning, it marked the end of one man's war, but not the end of the struggle he represented. The Battle of Britain continued after his death, though with decreasing intensity. The night bombing campaign against British cities would continue for months. The broader war would grind on for nearly 5 more years, consuming millions of lives and devastating entire continents. But the tide had turned over Britain in the fall of 1940, and František had been one of the men who turned it. In the final analysis, Josef František was both typical and exceptional. He was typical in that he represented thousands of military refugees who fled occupied Europe to continue fighting, men and women who refused to accept defeat and who found ways to keep resisting despite overwhelming odds. He was exceptional in his combat skills, his relentless aggression, and his personal tally of victories that exceeded nearly every other pilot in one of history's most famous air battles. His story reminds us that history is made not just by political leaders and generals, but by individual men and women making choices in moments of crisis. František chose to flee rather than submit when Czechoslovakia fell. He chose to keep fighting when Poland collapsed. He chose to escape internment in Romania and make his way to France. He chose to evacuate to Britain when France fell. And he chose to climb into his Hurricane day after day, knowing each flight might be his last, to hunt German aircraft over England. These choices, repeated by countless others, determined the outcome of the Battle of Britain and ultimately contributed to the defeat of Nazi Germany. František did not live to see victory, did not witness the liberation of his homeland in 1945, and died without knowing whether the sacrifices he and others made would ultimately matter. But they did matter. The Battle of Britain was won, Operation Sea Lion was cancelled, and Britain remained free to serve as the base from which the liberation of Europe would eventually be launched. The Hurricane František flew is gone. His body rests in a grave far from the Moravian homeland he fought to free, and only a handful of people who knew him personally might still be alive today. But his story endures, a testament to courage, skill, and the unbreakable determination of those who fight not for glory or reward, but because they cannot conceive of doing anything else. In the desperate summer and autumn of 1940, when civilization itself hung in the balance, Josef František was exactly the kind of pilot Britain needed, a man who would climb into his hurricane day after day and make the Germans pay for every mile of sky they tried to claim. That he did so while fighting alone, without the support of wingmen or the comfort of formation flying, makes his achievement all the more remarkable and his memory all the more worthy of preservation.